Welcome to the Cultivate Podcast, a podcast at HPUMC. All year long, we're studying the fruit of the Spirit. How do you cultivate a life with God that yields in us love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and so on? And this month's episode, episode 2, we're talking about joy. My name is Hannah Buchanan. I'm one of the pastors at Highland Methodist Church in Dallas, and I'm joined today by a very good friend who I happen to think is an expert in joy, Michelle Gielan. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Michelle, you have so many things on your resume. CBS News anchor, happiness researcher. What are you best known for?
Oh, my hope is that I'm best known for being an attentive, loving mother who can throw a really great Harry Potter party each fall with her husband.
We're going to come back to that as we talk about cultivating joy. It is important. Carry on.
But I don't know, professionally, I guess I would say right now I'm best known for making the transition from anchoring the national newscast at CBS News to being a positive psychology researcher, a happiness researcher, and making that choice because I saw that there are better ways that we can tell news stories about negative things in our lives in a way that leaves us feeling hopeful and optimistic, resilient, and ready to create positive change. When I discovered there was actually a science behind how to do that, the components of stories and the ways in which we just, in the general population, respond to these challenges, when we talk about them, how that can change the brains of other people, I was hooked. And so now I get to be a speaker, going around talking about the research that we do. I've written a book about it, and that's brought me a lot of joy.
Are you implying that being soaked in the 24-hour news cycle might not cultivate joy in one's life?
Yeah. So, well, we actually have research to back up that. You're very intuitive.
Yeah.
So I did a series of studies with Arianna Huffington looking at the impact of negative news on the brain. In the first study, we split up research participants into 2 groups. One group, we had them exposed to just 3 minutes of negative news in the morning. The other group was exposed to neutral news, as a kind of a control group. And then we tested them on a whole host of psychological and performance metrics. And what we found is, as compared to that control group, the people exposed to just those 3 minutes of negative news experienced a 27% drop in their likelihood of reporting their day as a good one. What was significant, though, is we would expect that we would see a drop in a lot of those performance and psychological metrics, which we did. But what was amazing about it is that we actually tested the participants 6 to 8 hours later after they were exposed. Wow. So think about it, as you're picking up your kids from school or ending your work day, that is when we saw this enormous drop in how people perceived their day. But I think the follow-up study was much more hopeful there. We didn't just expose people to problems, we went to talk about solutions. And as compared to those just exposed to problems, the ones that had just thought about what they could do about some of the greatest challenges that we're experiencing in our communities, they were 20% better on creative problem-solving tasks later on in the day. So what that tells me is what we talk about can make people smarter and better, more hopeful, more joyful, and all of that contributes to a mindset that makes us more successful at whatever we're trying to accomplish.
So paying attention to negative news actually decreases joy. Before we get into cultivating joy, what are some of the other things that you know or notice steal people's joy?
Well, I think getting stuck on the negative is probably one of the biggest thieves of our joy right now. And listen, hey, it's a very natural thing for human beings. We are hardwired to scan the world for challenges and problems, right? Because that was our survival for a long time. And for some people in some communities, it still is. And yet, right now, for many of us who are living in more stable societies, it's important for us to move our brain from a threat state where we're constantly scanning for those issues and to a place where we can more easily see the things that are working well, the things we're grateful for, the meaning embedded in the work that we're doing or how we raise our children, because those are actually the fuel that helps not only allow us to feel joy in the moment, but also it fuels our brain to be in that better state to fix all those issues that we might be seeing.
So often I think we fall into the trap of believing these are fixed mindsets. These are fixed things about us. Either, oh, she's so positive, or that guy's really negative. And what you're saying is we can actually affect our inputs in our mind. We can direct our brains that rewire then our emotional state. Is that right?
Yes. And think about it. We and psychologists and a bunch of people in a bunch of different fields wouldn't really have much of a job to do
right.
if we couldn't change all that stuff. So what we find in positive psychology in the research is that while we have we're predisposed, there's a genetic predisposition to a certain level of optimism or pessimism, of happiness and having access to it, or depression. That is not the end of the story. We have so much power to change the lens through which we view the world, through conscious acts that we can engage in. And when we do that, we see that so much changes. My favorite study was done on grumpy pessimists, which I think I might have mentioned when we were together here on a Sunday morning. So for those people who haven't heard this story, so the set of researchers, they recruited grumpy pessimists who had been practicing pessimism for 7 and 8 decades of their lives.
Practicing pessimism, that is a great phrase.
Right?
It's a practice.
It is, it's a practice. And then they put them through the paces. All they did was they asked them to write down 3 new and unique things they were grateful for each day for a period of time. While they were testing as moderate level pessimists at the beginning, those that kept up the practice daily for just 2 weeks began testing as low level optimists. Those that kept up the practice for 6 months began testing as moderate level optimists on average. So there's hope for pops just yet. Yeah, but I see study after study like that. It's little habits, it's not the big stuff that actually changes our access to seeing those pieces of our reality that together paint a completely different picture. It doesn't negate that there are real challenges and real things happening in our lives that can cause us to feel lonely and sad and anxious. At that exact same time, though, there are these bright spots. When we have access to those, that's how we recalibrate the picture and then reap the benefits of it.
I love when research and current science emphasize or affirms what was written in Scripture thousands of years ago before we had these systems. I think about the Apostle Paul, who is the one who penned the words about the fruits of the Spirit, also said, don't conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what you're talking about are practical ways to renew our minds.
Yes.
All right, so you're a happiness researcher. Happiness and joy, very similar, slightly different. How would you define both? How are they similar? How are they different?
So I think one is a component of the other.
Okay.
And one feeds into the other. So as a researcher, we need to have constructs to be able to study them. Yes. And so we need a true definition. In our work, we define happiness as the joy we feel growing towards our potential. And so when I say we, this is my husband, Sean Acor, and I. We do a lot of our research together. We work predominantly within the professional realm, whether it be at corporations or at schools. And we needed a definition that worked with whether you're trying to reach your potential as a manager, as as a chef, as an educator, like whatever domain. It's whatever's important to you and what you're trying to grow in. So, and then joy, we look at joy as, it's a positive emotional state. There's different components to it. Happiness is one of them. Pleasure is another, and contentment is the third. Okay. And kind of that trifecta together can create and spur greater levels of joy. Joy also is connected with greater inner peace, and it's usually comes as a result of being connected with an experience that is it's about something greater than ourselves. We're deepening our social ties with other people. There's deeper meaning involved in it. So, there's different types of pleasure, and I know you talked about that this past Sunday, right? I think there's the pleasure that we get from eating a candy bar, although there's not pleasure later when we're like, why did I eat that? And so that's kind of that momentary pleasure, but there's also a deep pleasure that can happen from connecting with someone in a meaningful way, or contributing to, a Habitat for Humanity type, the Carpenters for Christ project, right? Where you know that this is so much bigger than you, and this is changing some people's lives. And so yeah, there's yes and both and they all kind of feed into
They're
one
woven
another.
together.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so you said happiness, joy, contentment, and pleasure. Let's flip that for a moment. What is the opposite? If you were defining constructs for the absence of joy, what are those emotions?
So we often are asked about unhappiness and whether that's the opposite. And for a while I said, well, sure, there's an un in front of happiness, so it must be the
by
opposite.
definition, yes.
But when you really look at it, the opposite of happiness is actually apathy. Because unhappiness serves an incredible purpose. It can tell us, hey, things are not working at my job. I need to make a change. Or my son is suffering and I can see it in his eyes. He has unhappiness. We need to pivot, right? I think apathy is where you just have this lack of a will to do anything. And that is a gateway to depression, as we learn that our behavior doesn't matter and it's not going to create joy in the moment or in the future.
Right. I see this in married couples, and I've read this through the research of Drs. John and Julie Gottman, that they say healthy marriages are not determined whether there's the presence of conflict. Actually, a marriage is in trouble when there's no conflict, when there's indifference. And what I hear you saying is the opposite of happiness is not misery per se. No one wants to live in misery, but it's that apathy, in the same way that in a marriage, you may have active conflict and you may have love and romance and joy, but you're in trouble when there's actually apathy and distance, where you've learned there's no actual point in fighting anymore. And that's when you enter that sort of retreating state.
Yeah, you've checked out.
Yeah.
You're done. Yeah.
Have you ever been in that place?
So when I was in my mid-20s, I experienced a year-long bout with depression. And it's funny because if you looked at my life on paper, it was awesome, right? I landed a job in London. I had a really nice boyfriend, really sweet guy. And we went to new European cities every weekend. There was a new airline that was launched called Ryanair.
Oh, I have flown Ryanair.
Oh, you know.
Yes.
Okay, it's like a flying bus.
Yes.
It's really kind of...
But you can get lots of fantastic places inexpensively.
Yeah, I mean, like the tickets were $20,
yes.
right? You might have to pay to use the bathroom, but it was okay. At that same time, though, I was working from home. I was spending long hours by myself. My boyfriend worked all week long, so I didn't really see him. I had no friends or family around because everyone was back here, and it was hard to make new friends there. And on top of all of that, I was just lost. I think professionally I was lost, and I didn't have a support system. And so slowly, I started to walk into this experience of depression. I remember one day just sitting in my shoebox apartment looking out the window, and I can like laugh and be lighter about it now, but it was painful, and just wondering where was all this going, right? But I think I could see at that point there was a fork in the road, and if I didn't go right, I was going to go left, and left was apathy, because I could feel that apathy, that feeling of it creeping up. And so I had to do something that was going to show me that my behavior made a difference. And this is language that I know now, years and years later, right? I didn't know, all I knew was this gut instinct, like it's a survival instinct, I gotta do something. So I forced myself to go to the gym. I forced myself to write down anxious thoughts that I had and look for other facts, which I now officially call fact checking, right? I devoted a whole chapter to it in my book. But what I now could see was this survival instinct kicked in, and it was getting me to do small positive actions that not only made me feel just a little bit better each day in the moment, but also were collectively reminding my brain that when it came to my well-being, my behavior mattered. So right then and there, as that window moment, I think what also happened was I was losing access to joy, to those joyful moments, and by doing those positive habits, I was bringing that back into my life.
What you described as everything looking good on the outside, but feeling kind of hollow, a little bit lost on the inside, is something I think so many of us resonate with. In fact, Jesus has a line, I think in John's gospel, where he says, what good is it if you gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? That there's something deep in us that's hardwired for joy, for meaning, for significance. So given your, not just your personal testimony, but your research, for people who are in that space, have it all, but something is missing. Talk about the practices that actually lead out of that pit. I think sometimes what I've noticed is when we are in that apathetic state or we feel like things are spiraling, we often reach for pleasure or for comfort, which is not the same as joy. It is much more circumstantial. It doesn't always have the payoff we want. But you're talking about actual steps that lead to sustained well-being and satisfaction. What are those practices to help people cultivate joy?
We see that the path to joy is lined with gratitude. Gratitude is a cornerstone practice if we want to kick our brain into a new state, a more joyful state. And so I always advocate routinizing gratitude, make it a regular part of our lives. So it can show up in lots of different ways, and actually creativity is a wonderful piece of this whole puzzle, right? Make it your own and figure out what fits for you. Sometimes when we're in the state where we're so detached from our joy, it's just good to have a easy, simple program, and so I'll give you it. What we recommend always is write down 3 new and unique things each day that you're grateful for. And these are small, small things. So I had a cup of coffee with a friend and I just love being in her presence, right? Had that with you many times. Yeah. My son gave me a hug and it made me feel fully loved as a mother in that moment. Just small, simple things, and new each day, because the newness causes your brain to then scan the world over those next 23 hours and change for the good things that you can put on your list that next day. I say start your morning with it because then you've primed your day to be good. And then once you've kind of completed that for a period of time, like strive for a week or 2 or 3, you can get more creative with it if your brain is starting to adapt. When we were at the height of the pandemic, where everyone's locked up at home, I know you had this experience too, because your kids are kind of around the same age as ours. So we were running homeschool. We were trying to keep our work going. Yes. It was nuts. Yeah. And so I just remember too many times in a row, I was so exhausted by the end of the day. I knew that there were great experiences, beautiful, simple, wonderful, loving things that had happened during the day. But my brain hit the pillow and I could not record any of that stuff, right? And so I felt like life was passing me by and I had no written record. I decided to pick up a practice, which we've talked about many times before, called Best Moments. I would send Sean a text message, made it really easy, right? I'm already on my phone. Right. So at the end of the day, I'd send him a text message with just a handful of simple best moments of the day. And I'm the queen of like starting something and then stopping, starting, stopping. Yeah. This one I've actually kept up. I've done it almost every night for I don't know how many years now. I mean, I literally have about 1,000 messages. Wow. And it's the most, you were talking about joy, it's the most joyful thing for me because I can go back and look at those notes and they're triggers of all these memories that I would not have access to. My brain doesn't record stuff that well. Right. So now I have them. And it's made the world of difference, but I think from a brain perspective or more scientific perspective, what I think the value there is that it showed me a roadmap of what creates joy in my life. And so when then I'm in those moments the next day or the day after, I'm like, oh, this is one of them. And so my attention is, I'm refocused on all of that. Right. And then when you step back and you look at the last several years, your children are now 6 and 10, right? Yeah. You've actually created a written record of their childhood, of your family life. And for me, if I'm not consciously writing those small good things, the things I rehearse and replay are the hard things about the last 5 years, rather than those joyful moments. I've been so inspired hearing you talk about that practice. Yeah, it's been life-changing for me. C.S. Lewis was an atheist for most of his life before he became a Christian. And one of the things he talks about is that the sorrow in atheism is no one to direct your gratitude towards. And in your practice, or in the practice of gratitude,
there are certainly people to whom I'm grateful, but what a gift that we actually have someone to say thank you for these moments in our lives that are gifts that we just receive with open hands.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I've always had a very strong connection, thanks to my parents, since I was young, with God. I've always believed that God created us, that He's given us all that we have. The hope is that then we use all that we have to help others and to be loving in this world. And so, yeah, as I do this gratitude practice, I mean, you know me, I'm like a constant crier.
I'm looking at you like, are your eyes misty right now?
They do. And it's
twinkle.
I know. It'll keep my eyes moist and
Yes,
fully
yes,
into my 80s. But it's because I feel so connected to God through gratitude that, like, we have our ladies' Bible study, and I love these ladies. It's just been, it's seeing how they are their love in action and all the ways in which they're loving to the people in their lives and their communities and all that stuff. And it's like, so anyone shares the littlest story, I'm like, ooh, and I tear up because I attribute all of this to God. So whether it's official prayer, which we try to do with our children every night, oftentimes we bless the food, or it's the practice of best moments. I mean, all that starts and ends with God for me.
Yeah. And you mentioned being brought up very spiritual and aware of God and connected to God, but your journey into a relationship with Jesus happened in adulthood. Yeah. How has your experience of God through Jesus in this church and the community here affected your joy?
Well, I'm joyful every Sunday.
It is a pretty joyful place on Sunday mornings.
Yeah. It's wonderful because so I hit a lot of stuff from an intellectual standpoint. I love reading and spiritual literature from lots of traditions. And I grew up Jewish, and then I spent time just surveying what was out there in terms of, but again, just wanting to understand how people looked at the world, the different lenses through which they view the world. Yeah. And but then coming here, and thanks to you and Matt, and meeting you as friends, right, and then joining on Sunday, it just fit. It just worked. I was speaking the language that it's all the stuff we do from a psychological perspective. And then it just fit with everything that I learned about, the best of what I learned about, I should say, along the journey.
One of the things we've talked about in the past, and I mentioned Sunday, is I think what's unique about joy, particularly Christian joy, is that joy can coexist with suffering. And what I have appreciated about your research is to experience joy, we are not required to change our circumstances. We change our experience within the same set of circumstances. Can you speak to how you have seen joy cultivated in very difficult environments or very difficult circumstances?
Yeah, so I think joy you can feel in the ups and downs of life, even when things are most challenging.
Right.
Sometimes it's harder to feel that,
right,
but it can exist because I think alongside some of the greatest suffering is some of those elements that that we talk about on Sundays and that help us reconnect with the joy that is existing alongside it. So, sometimes it's just about shifting our perspective,
right,
seeing the greater meaning. When we have challenges in our lives, the reason why there are hard times is because we care oftentimes, right? There's meaning embedded in those experiences. Sean likes to say, oh, you can experience joy within the ups and downs of life, like childbirth. It's not necessarily pleasurable, but it's deeply meaningful.
Right.
I'm like,
since he has never experienced it.
I know, I always like to poke fun of him.
He has it right. Just,
but
secondhand.
He's right.
Yes.
Right?
You have taken this research, you and Sean together have taken this research into many different contexts, many of which have been corporate. But I'm curious about what this research did inside of, was he in Flint? Were you all in Flint public schools, in very under-resourced school districts? So we talk about difficulty, stress, from generational poverty to systemic dysfunction within a city. How does this research, these nuggets about cultivating joy and happiness and well-being, affect that?
Well, if we were to say, well, the only way that this community could experience joy is if we fix all these problems, so we should tackle those first, I think we're missing it. There we had incredible partners. The educators, the administrators there were just, they saw it, and they saw it in even fuller ways than we had. The potential to create joy in the midst of the issues that you mentioned. So they were very tactical and practical about it. They said, we're going to do 1,600 acts of kindness in 16 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So they led the entire community. The students were out there bringing hot cups of coffee to the freezing cold highway workers, right?
Yes.
In the middle of the night at 2 a.m. They brought, this is my favorite, they brought happiness packets to workers at the DMV until they were kicked out because the DMV said that's not our culture.
Because it's a government agency, yes.
So, but there they said, we know that we can affect positive change. They were giving an opportunity for these young people to see how much power they had in their community. And they did something absolutely beautiful. And that was just the start. I mean, they just top down, they brought it into the classroom. And we see over and over in communities, it's not just good for the culture and for the happiness levels. It's great for the academics. The students do better. We had an example in Illinois where at the same time that they were, because of redistricting, a percentage of children who were eligible for a free or reduced lunch program, went from 8 to 33%.
Okay.
So you can imagine some of the challenges that came along with that. Mm-hmm. They also implemented positive psychology interventions in the classroom and in the break room with the teachers to build a more positive culture. They found that the academics went, that particular district went from 83rd to 95th percentile academically in the state during that same time. So it's just remarkable to see that when we commit to creating joy on a regular basis, alongside the hardships, how that actually can help. Because we know the absence of disease does not necessarily guarantee good health, right? So it's not like if you eradicate all the problems, people will necessarily be thriving. Meanwhile, you can have those things exist alongside one another. And sometimes if we amplify the positive, we help lower the amount of the effect that the negative can have on the human brain.
This is such a great case study about how joy isn't self-contained. It has this contagious effect. It affects people around, and it makes so much more sense to me now why when Jesus or Paul or any of the other writers of Scripture are saying, like, rejoice, claim joy, cultivate joy, their vision for how it would ripple throughout the community and lift everyone else up with them.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to close by coming full circle to the Harry Potter party. You mentioned a moment ago that creativity, part of routinizing gratitude requires creativity. But you and Sean together are so creative in general. What's the relationship between creativity and joy? And then tell us how Harry Potter parties have affected the joy within your family.
Oh, so I want to give massive credit to my husband because he is phenomenal at being so creative to create that joy. So we like to joke, and I will say this, he's the idea man, and then I get it done.
Yes, yes.
and only because I think the idea stuff is the harder stuff, So what we have done is we've looked for opportunities to turn the everyday into the extraordinary. The way we do it in the fall is we decorate our entire house with all kinds of fun things related to Harry Potter or fall. We have literally probably about 10 lit up fall trees all over our front hallway.
You have owls hanging from the ceiling. You have candles hanging from the ceiling.
Like the Great Hall.
Yes.
Absolutely. And the idea there is to mark the passage of time and bring happiness each day that we can to our children and then to our community, right? We have friends over and celebrate together. And so creativity with some of these positive habits, the thing with the positive habit is, yes, you can write down 3 new and unique things you're grateful for after a period of time. What often happens is that our brain just gets used to it, so it doesn't have the same net effect that it would previously. And so that's where the creativity can help. So maybe instead you can of writing the gratitudes down, you can share the gratitudes with your spouse. I shared this study too, which I love and I repeat all the time, is that you share 3 new and unique things with your spouse each night before you go to bed. You'll rate each other as significantly more attractive 6 months later than you did prior. So I think putting the creativity spin on it, look for opportunities to do random acts of kindness for other people. Look for opportunity to send positive notes or emails. Just take the habit and put a twist on it, make it your own, and that I think can not only give you the joy now, but spread it to other people and create that positive ripple effect. If anyone ever tells you that a hobby you have that's bringing you joy, or something you're engaging in that is wholesome and wonderful and meaningful is selfish, you should tell them, come talk to me.
Yeah.
Because the more that you can delight in all of these things that God has given us, the more that you fuel your joy, and then you can ripple that out to other people as well.
It makes such a difference.
It does.
Okay, so for those of you listening, our question to you is, how will you cultivate joy this season?
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be just today, but think about your calendar for the days and the weeks ahead. How will you cultivate joy? Is it the practice of gratitude? Is it putting something on the calendar that requires you to be creative? Hospitality is one of those things for you all. It is for us too. And it feels like work at points, but it does create joy and beauty and something deeper and more sustaining.
Yeah.
So before you press pause on this podcast and move on with your day, what is one thing you'll commit to cultivate joy? Michelle, you have a question or a last word?
No, I think you did it beautifully. I love it.
Thanks for joining us today, and blessings as you cultivate joy.